cities have long battled a poor reputation as cauldrons of stress, fostering high rates of depression and other mental illnesses. But new research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences Journal suggests that big cities actually have some mental health benefits over their smaller counterparts. So joining me live in the studio is Bloomberg's Hadriana Loenkron, who recently wrote about the study. So Hadriana, thank you so much for being here. Talk to us about sort of the mental health benefits that big cities offer that maybe smaller cities do not. This is kind of surprising stuff.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. So really what we've seen in the past with research looking at cities is that the urban lifestyle has really actually been a stressor to many residents. So you have, rushing for public transportation, and you have, more polluted air in the environment. You have maybe higher rates of crime. And what this study is actually showing that there are some positive benefits to these residents, and that is really looking at the social interactions. So the greater the city, the larger the population, and the greater chance that you're going to have these social interactions, regardless of how small they may be.
How small or how stressful they may be too, right? Running into someone on the train. How did the researchers go about actually calculating this data and figuring this out?
Right. So essentially, the hypothesis, or really the question that they're trying to answer, is how does the built environment or the infrastructure of cities kind of affect the brain and the behavior? And so they looked at a few epidemiological studies, one from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, another on the Behavior Risk Surveillance System, as well as looked at two Twitter data sets, really analyzing the usage of Twitter and trying to understand, what exactly is a kind of a depressive symptom. And all of the data sets were concordant with each other, and they're really finding that these larger cities have these lower rates of depression.
Wow. And I think it's fascinating to note, too, of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic,
right.
But this study, this data was taken from 2019, right? So prior to the pandemic.
Right, right. So, yeah, it is a little harder for us to know exactly how the pandemic has influenced this particular set of data. But what we do know from the pandemic and from what has been very prevalent in the medical field is that the pandemic has, increased isolation. And what we know is that this isolation is actually a very large factor in mental health illnesses such as anxiety, such as depression. And so while this particular data set and the study doesn't have the data from the pandemic, it's very likely that, the increased set of isolation from the pandemic will further, prove these data sets to be accurate.
And how can people take this information in this study and sort of put it to use? News you can use, considering the fact that some of this information about bigger cities and mental health. I'm curious what you think.
Right. So when I spoke with the lead author, Andrew Steer, a PhD student in UChicago, trying to understand, how can these urban planners, what can they take away from this? What we're looking at here is accessibility within the cities. And especially with higher rent prices and constant moving around in the cities, how can people outside of the cities reap these same benefits? And really what the goal here is to look at how we can, increase transportation, move things around, make the city more accessible for people to all benefit and increase those populations and have these greater opportunities for moving around, which then leads to higher social interactions.